Kenny MacAskill.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I have to say I agree with a lot of what the Honourable Member for Bamford-Buchan has said, even although I disagree with the purpose of this bill, which seems to me to be political grandstanding indicative only of it being an election year, entirely failing to serve the significant needs of those who are struggling to heat their homes in Scotland at the present moment, of meeting the needs of the Scottish economy that should be basking in all the glory and the wealth that has been created through oil and gas, and indeed also of failing to address the needs of our wider planet. There is, of course, a need to transition. That is self-evident. It's not simply the global warming that members were talking about. The trains in my constituency were cancelled today. The A1 was closed today because a lorry was overturned. An HGV vehicle, not a high-sided one. It was the strength of the winds that battered the communities in my own constituency and indeed elsewhere. We have serious problems coming down the line, and we do require to change. But it requires to be a just transition. It requires to be done at a pace that allows us to change, because we do have to ensure that we keep those skills. We cannot do to those in the oil and gas sector what was done by Thatcher to the miners and simply close them down and throw them to the wolves. We have to ensure that we also transition towards renewables, and that does require the oil and gas, because it does take oil and gas to make that journey. I can see it in the hills of the Lammermuirs. I can see it on a daily basis as the increased wind turbines go into the Firth of Forth. But at the end of the day, the ships that are currently tracking and putting in the columns and the turbines run on marine diesel. A lot of the turbines require plastics to be constructed, and we also require the vehicles simply to get them there. So we do have to get to that renewable future. Indeed, the tragedy in Scotland is we're already there in producing almost as much energy as we require. Our people just don't get the benefit of it because it's transmission south and they're charged at an appalling rate when it should be almost free, given that they can see it from their homes, on their hills and indeed off their shores. But there has to be a change. There's also the perversity coming, because I do agree with new licensing. But what we're seeing in Rosebank is it's going to be operated and owned by Equinor, the state energy company of Norway. The profits are going to go to Oslo. Scotland and Norway discovered oil at the same time because we share that access to the North Sea basin. Norway's got a standard of living and an economy that those in Scotland can only look at and weep with envy. They've also got a futures fund because they've put the money away, not allowed the super rich to get even richer, investing in foreign bank accounts or indeed Highland estates. They've got a futures fund that Scotland has precisely nothing. But we do have to continue building. I do believe that we have to have continued extraction of oil and gas, but it has to be at a pace that is significant for Scotland, that also takes into account the needs of the global planet and a requirement to meet it. But it also has to have two particular aspects. First of all, as per the written amendment in the name of both myself and my group leader here, Neil Hanvey, the MP for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath, we have to have a commitment to net zero carbon footprint. And in particular, that means taking into account the needs of carbon capture. Because Scotland's had the bounty of North Sea oil, we need to make sure that we continue to get benefit from it. We've got the bounty coming of renewable, and we see it in offshore wind, floating and indeed fixed. But we also have huge potential with carbon capture, because the geology of the North Sea provides something like 30% of the opportunities in Europe, and so Scotland has to benefit from carbon capture. Yes, it's untested, but our society and our planet needs it. But more importantly, we do have to have a commitment to a refinery at Grangemouth being retained. It is absurd, as others have said today, that the oil from the North Sea is transshipped abroad in the main to be refined, and then we import from other super tankers coming in, passing them the high seas. That is simply absurd. As we have a worsening planet crisis, it is perverse. It's not good enough to say it's the wrong type of oil, no more than we'd accept it from a rail operating company that it was the wrong type of leaves on the tracks. Yes, our refineries are not at the capacity of the engineering or the technical skills to be able to refine it. That should be done. The first place to do it is in Grangemouth. Why in Grangemouth? Because the Forties pipeline comes into Grangemouth. It lands, as the member for Banff-and-Buchan knows, in Cruden Bay in his constituency, but it's piped down to the Forties pipeline down to Grangemouth. It is absurd that Grangemouth should be closing when the oil is coming in from the North Sea, both past, present and indeed future. So if there is to be this continued extraction of Scotland's need that we have not benefited from because we don't have the wealth or savings that Norway has, we have to at least ensure that we save Grangemouth. I call upon the UK government to ensure that they provide the funds, first of all, to provide for the hydro cracker that will increase the profitability of the existing site threefold. If that is done, and it is a fraction of what the UK has taken in terms of the billions it's got from North Sea oil over the years, it's a fraction of what it will continue to take in petroleum revenue tax and other benefits in coming years. What we have to ensure is we get the profitability up. Then we have to make sure in a couple of years that we take the engineering and skills and then take the technology and we make sure that the oil from the North Sea can be refined in Grangemouth. It is absurd and perverse that that is not done, and it requires to be a condition. By all means, if the member wants to.
I thank the member for giving way. And would he accept that one of the reasons why we have not had investment in the refining industry in the United Kingdom for decades now is precisely because of the net zero policies which are being followed, the cost and the charges for carbon, the emissions trading scheme and other carbon taxes which discourage any investment in the very production facilities which we use to process the oil that we bring out?
I think there's a variety of factors. I've no doubt some of those factors are also there. There's also been a failure to invest. Where the blame doesn't lie is with a workforce that is skilled, that has to work at the present moment with a refinery that is frankly past its sell-by date and requires to be invested in. Even the union and the workforce will recognise that. It requires that investment to get the hydrocracker going and to get the technology to ensure that we refine the oil there. Those who have taken the benefit, and it's probably not the current owners Petro Ineos, it's been previous owners who have taken the wealth, invested in their shareholders, taken it for themselves and not put it back either into the workforce or indeed into the capacity at the refinery. Tragedy, that's something happens across so much of UK industry, whether the shipyards, whether steelworks or whatever else. But we are now seeing a government that is going to benefit from North Sea oil's continued extraction. So what the least that Scotland's entitled to expect is that its refinery will be at the heart of it, especially when the oil is going to flow down that golden thread in the Forties pipeline down to Grangemouth. We require to ensure that Grangemouth will refine it. Yes, it requires technical changes. Yes, that will come at a cost, but it is a small fraction of what the UK is going to take from the benefit of that North Sea oil. That is why our support as a party is conditional upon carbon capture and the net zero footprint, but it's also conditional upon Grangemouth being at the heart. It is absurd that Scotland is not getting the wealth from the oil that is off its shores. It is absurd that countries have seen their desert redeveloped, have seen the desert bloom because of the oil that they've had. What we've seen with North Sea oil is an industrial desert created, and having been brought up only some 10 or 15 miles from Grangemouth, I know the devastation that will come to that community unless there are the changes required to ensure that it does the refining for North Sea oil. We cannot afford to have Grangemouth thrown to the wolves. And as in the debate previously last week, we cannot have Grangemouth no more. We require to ensure a refinery capacity. It would be absurd that Scotland and the UK would have in Grangemouth no refinery capacity. Scotland's 21st in the nations that have produced oil. We would be the only one in the top 25 that does not have a refinery capacity. The only other countries who tend to not have a refinery capacity are the likes of the Republic of Congo and Trinidad and Tobago. I wish those countries no ill. I'm sure they're fine countries, but they don't produce the same level of oil. They're not a developed industrial economy, and the fact of the matter is Scotland should not be in the same position that it's an oil-producing nation without a refinery capacity. On that basis, Grangemouth must be retained, and I call upon the Government to do that. The only additional point I will make, Mr Speaker, is that the Scottish Government too requires to step up to the plate. The fact of the matter that the Business and Economy Secretary in Scotland appears to be accepting the closure of Grangemouth as something that's just going to happen and is all maybe rather matter of regret is simply unacceptable. He may be in coalition with the Greens, but he cannot have them wagging the SNP dog. It is simply unacceptable that we see Grangemouth closed without a fight. The Scottish Government should be leading the demands that the refinery is changed, that we do ensure the hydrocracker, that we do provide the changes to refine in Scotland, that we do move towards biofuels. What they shouldn't be doing is wringing their hands and selling the workforce in Grangemouth out. We require a refinery capacity in Scotland. The UK Government's got the benefits of Scotland's oil and should pay for it. And it's about time that Scottish Government stood up for industrial Scotland and the workers who at one point put their trust and faith in them.